Hey everyone, welcome to this episode of KuTube. Today we're going to be really exploring how to convert between fraction, decimals, and percentages. Before we begin today's class, please make sure you have the following materials: a pencil, a pen for corrections, a loose leaf piece of paper with with our title on top, or a copy of today's notes if you're able to print it. Alright, let's get started. Like I said a moment ago, we are going to be talking about how to convert between fractions, decimals, and percents. And this is really going to set the stage for our percent unit. You should be coming into class knowing a little bit about fractions, knowing a little bit about decimals, and knowing a little bit about percentages. But today we're really going to explore how we can create equivalent fraction, decimals, and percentages, and really some how-to tricks to really navigate between those three. Alright, so let's begin with the definition. On the top of your notes, if you are writing your own notes, please write down the definition for a percent. A percent is a ratio, and we've talked a lot about ratios, right? A ratio is comparing any two things, but a percent is a specific ratio comparing a number to 100. If we break apart the word percent, where cent is like the prefix for century, right? Every time we're talking about percent, we're saying per 100 or out of 100. Now that doesn't necessarily mean we're always dealing with 100. Now if we take a look at this image on the right, what's nice about this is I have 100 squares. And 65 of those squares are shaded in. So we have 65 over 100. We know 65 hundredths can also be written as a decimal. We also know that if it's out of 100, we can also write it as a percent. Now the reason we want to know between these three forms is because depending on the situation, sometimes we might want to use percentages, other times we might want to use fractions, and other times we might want to use decimals. Alright, so as we go through some examples today, really think about building on some of our common sense and understanding when are certain scenarios more leaning towards fractions, decimals, and percents. Alright, the first thing we are really going to be exploring is how to convert between a fraction to a percent. So if you are kind of writing your own notes, please make this a brand new heading. You might want to skip a line or two. And I'm going to put giant stars next to us. This is going to be the first major conversion that we're going to really talk about. And when we convert between a fraction to a percent, we have a few different steps. All right, step one is we want to see if it's a benchmark fraction. I don't know about you, but if I can just write down the answer, that's what I want to do as quickly as possible. So step one is to see if it's a fraction we already know. Now, what's listed here is about 10 different fractions that we really need to know and memorize, and I'm going to reference these as my benchmark fractions. So if you are following along with notes today, I would actually take out a pen and write down these 10 different fractions. Notice none of them are written like this with the slash. We really write numerator over denominator. All right, once you're ready, we're going to actually go through and actually examine how we can take each of these fractions and what do we know automatically of what they are as a decimal and as a percent. Well, 1/2 we know is 0.5, and we know that's 50%. So we've written half as a fraction, as a decimal, and as a percent. All right, I want you to pause the video and see how many of these can you write as a decimal and as a percent. When you're ready, unpause the video. All right, at this point, hopefully you filled out this benchmark fraction sheet. Let's kind of go through and see if you got them correct. What did you write 1/4 as a decimal? Good, 0.25, right? Because we can kind of say it's like 1/4. As a percent, 25%. What about 3/4 or 3/4? Good, 0.75, which we know is 75%. What about 1/10? Good, we kind of write it exactly the same way we say it, right? 1/10. As a percent, though, we're going to move the decimal place 2 places to the right. That's 10%. All right, what did you guys get for 1/5? Good, 0.2, which is 20%. All right, now we're going to get to 5 trickier ones. Hopefully the ones on the left we really did know already, kind of from our previous experience in different grade levels. But let's look at some of these trickier ones. Now 1/3 and 2/3 are going to show up a lot in the next unit and also in the future. So if we take 1/3, hopefully you guys knew that that's a repeating decimal, 0.3 repeating. As a percent, we write this as 33.3 repeating percent or 33 1/3%. Little tricky, right? Well, if 1/3 is 0.3 repeating, what's 2/3? Good, 0.6 repeating, which we can write as 66.6 repeating percent, or 66 2/3%. Anyone know what 1/8 is? Good, 0.125 or 12.5%. Well, if 1/8 is 0.125, what's 3/8? Right, we just multiply by 3. So we have 0.375, which is also 37.5%. And then finally, how do we get to 7/8? Well, we can multiply by 7, right? That's going to give me 0.875, and that's 87.5%. Now, if you're sitting here and go, I did not know a lot of these, that's okay. But we do want to make sure that we really learn these benchmark fractions, because one of our first steps from converting between any fraction, decimal, percent is to really know the basics. And these 10 fractions are really our benchmark ones. If we can memorize these, it will really make our life easier in the next unit, all right? Now, an easy way to kind of explore why these are important is if you take a look at these percentages on the left here, these are really common percentages you'll see a lot when you're shopping, right? 50%, 25% off, 75%, 10%, 20%. So really knowing these conversions to fractions and decimals will really help us later on when we start doing some percent application problems. Now the ones on the right, well, these aren't nearly as common as we usually see in shopping, right? These look a little bit more funky, but these fractions often show up. So knowing those decimals and percentages are really going to help us. So if you need to, take a moment to pause the video and make sure you have these written down and that you memorize these. And I'm actually going to put a right note here, memorize and learn these. All right. So step 1 is to see if it's a benchmark fraction. Well, unfortunately, there's a lot of other fractions out there in the world, so they're not all going to be benchmark fractions. So step 2 is to see if you can turn the denominator into 100. Now, if you take a look at these 5 examples, you're going to see that these are all fractions, and remember, our goal is to turn them to a percent. Well, these are nice, easy ones to turn into a percent, because like we said, percent means per 100. So our goal here is to make the denominator 100. Well, let's zoom in here. If we have 19 over 20, I'm going to ask myself, how can I take that denominator and turn it into 100? Well, we can multiply by 5. If we do that to the denominator, we can do that to the numerator, and what do we get? Good, 95. And in this case, since it's 95 out of 100, we know it's 95%. Now, we can use a little common sense here. If you got a 19 out of 20 on a quiz, you did really well, right? That's over 50%. And that's really kind of the majority of them. So yeah, you should get a 95%, all right? So really using that common sense just to make sure your answer makes sense. All right, let's take a look at this next one, 11 over 25. Can we turn that denominator into 100? Absolutely. We can multiply by 4. So we're going to make an equivalent fraction first, 44 over 100, and we're going to make that into a percent. What's 44 hundredths as a percent? Good, 44%. All right, now we have 51 over 50. This one seems a little funny because we automatically see we have 51 out of 50 questions on a test correct, let's say. If you had 51 out of 50 questions correct, what does that mean? Good, you have extra credit, right? It means you've scored over the amount on the test. So we're going to do the same thing. We're going to turn this into 100. We're going to multiply the top and the bottom by 2 in this case. And we have 102 over 100. And we're going to say that this is 102%. And although we typically like to say 100% is the highest we can be, remember we can always have over 100% or even a part of a percent. So get used to seeing ones that are over 100 and maybe a decimal as a percent. All right, now the next two look a little bit trickier, but if we take the time to really explore these two are also easy ones to turn the denominator into 100. If I look at 21 over 30, well, in my brain I say, well, 21 over 30, 30 is kind of hard to turn into 100. But on the side here, I notice that this can be simplified. I can take 21 over 30 and divide the top and bottom by 3, and I get 7/10. Now that's easier to turn the denominator into 100. So to do that, I'm going to multiply the top and bottom by 10. All right, and we're going to get 70%. I'm going to double check to make sure that that makes sense in the context. Well, 21 out of 30, I'm going to use that knowledge of kind of test taking, right? If I got 21 out of 30 questions correct, well, I know 15 out of 30 is 50%. I've definitely scored over 50%, so that 70% does make sense. All right, let's get to our last one here. 52 out of 200. How can I possibly take that denominator and turn it into 100? Good, I can divide by 2. So then ask yourself, what's 52 divided by 2? Good, 26. So we get the answer of 26%. All right, so now we know how to turn a fraction to percent if the denominator can easily be turned to 100. But unfortunately, we're going to have some fractions that aren't so easy to turn the denominator into 100. And that's where we have to use long division. And I purposely call this step 3 because we never want to use long division. It is time consuming and there's a lot of room for error. So we want to make sure we're being careful with that. Now, if I have to turn this into a percent, I want to first and foremost turn this into a decimal. And we know to turn 9/40ths into a decimal, we would have to do 9 divided by 40. If you have a calculator, you can plug in 9 divided by 40 and see what you got. Good, 0.225. Now to turn that into a percent, we're going to move the decimal place 2 places to the right here. And we're going to get 22.5%. So I want you to try the same thing with 11/15. Notice that's not a benchmark fraction. Notice it's not easily turning into 100. So take the numerator and divide it by the denominator. What do you get? Good, 0.73 repeating. Now we're going to move the decimal 2 places to the right. This gets a little tricky. This is 73.3 repeating percent. All right. So let's recap for a moment because we just did a lot at once. We started off by converting fractions to percents, and we said there's a really 3-step process. The first thing we should see is if it's a benchmark fraction. If it's not, we should see if we can turn the denominator into 100. And then our last resort is always to do that long division. All right. Let's get to some easier examples. Let's talk about how to convert a percent to a decimal. Once again, if you're following along with some notes, skip a line or two, make a new title, put some stars around this if you want, and now we're going to talk about how we can turn every percent into a decimal. Well, this is nice and easy because every percent, anytime we see a percent sign, it literally means out of 100. So we're going to divide the decimal value by 100. And we know that when we divide by 100, we move the decimal places 2 places to the left, right? That double butt cheek to the left. So go ahead and write that down. Even draw the picture on the right-hand side here, right? With the double butt cheek or moving the decimal place 2 places to the left. And let's convert each percentage here into a decimal. All right, 55%. Well, the decimal point here is at the end, so I'm moving it 2 places to the left, and I get 0.55. And that's its decimal conversion. Go ahead and try these 3 examples, pause the video, and when you're ready, unpause the video. All right, for 3%, I'm going to move the decimal place 2 places to the left, 1, 2. I'm going to fill in the rest with 0, so I have 0.03. For 114%, that's over 100%, so I'm moving it 2 places to the left, 1.14. For 0.5%, don't get alarmed by that, that's just saying half of 1%. We're still moving 2 places to the left. We get 0.005, or 5 thousandths. How'd you do? Good. All right, so now we've talked about how to convert percents to decimals. Let's talk about how to convert decimals to percents. I know this is a lengthy video, I'm sorry. All right, so skip a line or two again, and let's talk about how to convert a decimal to a percent. Well, if to go from a percent to a decimal, we divide by 100, to go from a decimal to a percent, we must multiply by 100. or in other words, move 2 places to the right. So I wish these weren't here. We're going to actually write in the percent signs. So 0.47 is 47%. I move the decimal 2 places to the right and I get my percent. All right, go ahead and try each of these examples out. Go ahead and pause the video and turn each of these decimals to a percent by moving the decimal value 2 places to the right. All right, for the second one, you should have gotten 8%. For this one, I'm going to move it 2 places to the right. I get 150%. I'm going to move 2 places to the right. I get 34.5%. I'm going to pause here because a common mistake students make is they write 34.5. But look what you just wrote here. Is 345 thousandths equivalent to 34.5? Absolutely not. If we were dealing with money, I would much rather have $34.50. So always make sure you have that percent sign. 0.7, what did you get here? Good, 70%. And what about 2? Good, 200%. All right, hopefully this helped you understand how to convert between a decimal to a percent. All right, our last one, we're going to talk about how to convert a percent to a fraction now. So skip a line or two, put stars next to this, and write a little blurb about how to do that. In order to convert every percent to a fraction, we simply just place it over 100 and then simplify the fraction. So let me show you how I do this. In number 1, we have 2%. Since the percent symbol literally means out of 100, I'm going to do 2 out of 100. I'm going to simplify that fraction by dividing the top and bottom by 2, and I get 1 over 50. Try out number 2, 3, and 4, and then when you're ready, unpause the video to see if you're correct. All right, so hopefully you've tried out 2, 3, and 4. We're going to go through these problems pretty quickly. For number 2, I'm going to still do that same idea, 140 over 100, right? That percent sign literally means out of 100. We're going to cancel out the 0. We have 14 over 10. We can divide the top and bottom by 2, so we get 7/5. Number 3 is a little trickier because I have a decimal. Well, I do the same thing, 3.4 over 100. Now I cannot keep a decimal in the numerator, so I have to turn that into a whole number by moving the decimal once to the right or multiplying by 10, which means I have to multiply by 10 in the denominator. We get 34 over 1,000. I can simplify that by dividing the top and bottom by 2. I get 17 over 500. Now, if this idea of a decimal in the numerator confuses you, keep in mind you can take the 3.4% and turn it into a decimal first, and then write it as a fraction, right? 34 thousandths. So 2 different options here. Number 4 is very similar. I'm going to write 5.5% as 5.5%. I can once again write 5.5 over 100. I can multiply the top by 10 and multiply the denominator by 10. We get 55 over 1,000. This is a nice easy one to simplify. Divide the top and bottom by 5. I get 11 over 200. All right, how'd you do? Good. All right. If you are following along with the printed notes, this will be nice and easy. However, if you are not following on the printed note, please copy this table down. And I'm going to model the first one for you in just a moment. If you need to, pause the video. All right, so in this table, you're going to notice that I've given you some decimals, some fractions, and some percents. It's your job to convert between all 3. Now, you have your notes to reference, but I am going to talk a little about some tricks that we can use in order to simplify this. Now, in the first example, I notice that I have a decimal, 57 hundredths. Now, I know to convert between a decimal to a percent, I'm going to move decimal place 2 places to the right. So my percent is 57%. Making sure I have my percent sign anytime I'm in the percent column. Now, I also want to turn this into a fraction. Well, I know when I say my decimal 57 hundredths, I can literally write it as 57 over 100. I'm going to put that in the middle. Since I cannot reduce it any further, this is my final answer. All right, if you'd like, you may pause the video and try these out. When you're done, unpause the video and I'll be going over each of these answers. All right, so hopefully you've had a chance to try these. If not, we're going to go through them. So let's take a look at the second example. We're going to number these. Number 1, 2, 3, and 4. In number 2, I'm going to take the 35% and turn it into a decimal first. I'm going to do that by moving the decimal place 2 places to the left. I got 0.35. Well, to turn that into a fraction, that's 35 hundredths, which I know I can simplify to 7/20. All right. Okay, now I'm going to look at 1 4/5, and I'm going to say, how can I turn that to a decimal? Well, I notice that 4/5 is one of my benchmark fractions. What decimal represents 4/5? Good, 0.8. So 1 4/5 must be 1.8. To turn that into a percent, I move 2 places to the right again. I have 180%. All right, the last example, to go from a percent to a decimal, 2 places to the left. So I have 0.345. I'm going to take that and put that over 345 thousandths. I'm going to divide the top and bottom to simplify that. So 345 divided by 5 gives me 69/200. All right. We've done a lot in this video. We've talked about the benchmark fraction list. We've identified different strategies to turn a fraction into a percent. We talked about how to convert a fraction to a decimal, a percent to a fraction, and a percent to a decimal. Take a moment and reflect on all of these. This was a lot in one lesson. Remember, you have your notes as you complete some practice problems. The more you reference the notes, the more you'll know how to convert between fractions, decimals, and percents. Thanks so much for watching. I hope this video helped to navigate your way between conversions between fractions, decimals, and percents. Bye, everyone.